I think that God lets worlds develop according in a certain way, but because God can oversee an overarching narrative, he knows exactly how he can redeem anything.
So he set up the, what do you mean according to a certain way? Didn't he, are we not saying that he defined the rules of that world in the first place? What, like,
the first time, sorry, go ahead.
Could God have made it such that animals were all herbivores instead of carnivores and omnivores?
What if the death of the child brings their parents to God?
Then perhaps then the parents should be grateful that child got leukemia because it's doing the will of the Lord.
Come on, bro. That was the best thing you could come up with? Oh, come on.
You know, I know this is a very unpopular thing. God can do whatever he wants, right? Whether it's, you know, genocide.
Yes. Oh my God. I actually, you know what? I thought, I thought I was being hyperbolic when I said they were going to make the way more unhinged argument that actually God can just, you know, command whatever or whatever. But, yeah, here we go. If you want to see more content like this, I would really appreciate you liking and subscribing. It really helps with the algorithm. And make sure to check out the Discord and other social links in the description. All right, my goat, Alex O'Connor, okay? Destroying 25 Christians. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Could there be a purpose to it?
Did God command the ethnic cleansing of the land of Israel?
I'm not saying the scribe made something up. I'm saying the scribe has a command.
So where did they get that command from?
From God.
I had Jesus appear to me 3 years ago.
I don't know what's happening now. I have to suspect it's some
Dog, kill me. Oh, no.
Hi, my name's Alex O'Connor. I'm an atheist and host of the Within Reason podcast. And today I'm surrounded by 25 Christians who, God willing,
Well,
might be able to
1.25. What's up,
My
Grand
first claim
Designs?
is
Enjoy.
that suffering
Welcome back.
makes God's existence unlikely. Good work. Hey,
how's it going?
how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Why don't you just begin? Why is suffering or evil make God's existence unlikely?
I think when confronted with two hypotheses, so atheism, naturalism, or theism, we should ask what we expect would occur under either hypothesis. And then we look at the world and we see what does actually occur. And what do we find? We find, I think most relevant here, a system of natural selection, the mechanism by which God apparently chose to bring animals
yep, immediately.
into
Animal
existence.
suffering based.
A system which is defined by suffering. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as the death and suffering and destruction of the unfit. I'm told that the very mechanism that God chose to
You want to play more
about
bits from Alex? I watch Alex O'Connor on my own time. Most of his videos aren't good reaction content, but it's like an actual like debate thing. I like Alex too. I really like Alex too. Testicle Johnson.
Species as the ultimate end of his creation was one that is imbued with suffering, such that 99.9% of all the species, let alone animals, that have ever existed on planet Earth have been brutally wiped from existence into extinction. And I think that that's less likely on theism. If you assume atheism or materialism, not only do you explain this, you also come to expect it.
What is your, I guess, epistemology? How do you know that this is the case, that it's less likely?
Thanks for the
that,
follow.
You know, an atheist worldview,
It's a
naturalistic
spot,
worldview, will look
goddammit.
like the way it is today.
Of course, we don't know, but that's why I use the phraseology of unlikely. I think that if you were to tell somebody who was sort of in some Rawlsian state of nature, hadn't seen the world, and you said that the world has been created by an omnibenevolent, all-powerful God, what kind of world would that person be imagining? And if you dropped them into the world, if you were given the opportunity to become a wild animal, like in 2 seconds, I was just going to turn you into a random wild animal somewhere on planet Earth. I like being a guy. I think you'd probably kill yourself before I had the opportunity, because you know that the life of these animals is almost defined in terms of their suffering.
I guess I just don't really see how you can justify that claim per se. What I would say is that if we actually take into account the holistic view of the scriptures, which I do think that you have to do, we see that it's actually much more coherent once you acknowledge that evil itself doesn't have ontology. Evil's not a thing. You don't look under a rock and say, there's the evil, right?
Fine by me.
And so
I'm not really talking about evil here, because that's, of course, a moral term. I'm talking about suffering.
can you distinctualize suffering and evil?
So evil is a moral term. Evil means that something is bad, it's immoral. You need to have a moral ontology for that. Suffering is just any experience that's not wanted when experienced, right? And so even if you don't have a moral objectivism, you can still say that suffering exists. So here's a question. A deer gets its leg caught under the branch of a tree that's fallen over in the wild, and it starves to death in confused agony. Why does God oversee this? And why does God set the natural world up such that events like this occur?
Well, because the ultimate view here is that...
Okay, pause.
Nice to meet you.
Damn.
Good work.
How's it going?
Nice to meet you too.
Okay, so my first question to start out with is, what exactly about suffering makes this unlikely on the condition that God exists?
I think that if God is all-loving, then he probably wouldn't want his creatures to suffer. And so I think that the fact that they do suffer makes his existence less likely.
Okay, perfect. And is there some specific aspect of suffering that you're particularly honing in on?
Sorry, I can't focus on stupid fucking dead dog, man. Dude, this dead dog makes the existence of God less likely. God damn. Oh my God. You know, actually, it's really funny. and it makes me experience positive qualia. Okay, it makes God's existence more likely. Actually, goddamn. Okay, Jesus.
Horrendous or
In
whatever that
particular, non-human animal suffering, because I think that the
I think we could revive it. I don't know how though.
Trying to explain why suffering exists. Human free will, the development of the soul, higher order goods, all of this kind of stuff. None of which apply to the suffering of non-human animals.
Have you heard of the axiological expectation mismatch problem?
I have not.
Okay, so
Jesus, oh my God. It refers to a situation where there's a discrepancy between what someone expects to be good or valuable and what they actually observe in the world, leading into some sense of conflict or dissidence.
I've started to understand that the thing that actually generates a problem
Nerd alert,
between God and suffering is
true.
actually the value system you attach to the very attribute of perfect lovingness. Because the problem of evil is an internal critique, you have to look at a very specific version of theism and how it defines perfect lovingness. I want to present to you a version where my version of perfect lovingness does not actually constitute a problem and a misalignment, that mismatch between the suffering of animals, let's just say the profusion of suffering of animals and the existence of God.
So let's hear it. What kind of God are we imagining that would allow and oversee and do nothing to prevent billions of years of untold animal suffering?
Right, so you're talking about non-prevention.
Or setting up the system that is natural selection such that it relies upon things like predation and disease.
Well, the first part is I don't agree with the whole setting up the system part. So I'm not one of those theists that believes that God does this select and pick idea of creating worlds. I don't think that God actually creates worlds. I think that God lets worlds develop according in a certain way, but because God can oversee an overarching narrative, he knows exactly how he can redeem anything.
Did he set up what do you mean according to a certain way? Didn't he? Are we not saying that he defined the rules of that world in the first place?
the first time, sorry, go ahead.
Could God have made it such that animals were all herbivores instead of carnivores and omnivores?
Yes, he could totally do that.
Okay, so had he done that, here's an instant way to reduce by orders of magnitude the amount of suffering that exists.
Right, but hold on. That's particularly assuming a value theory already that I haven't told you I'm adopting that has a problem with the evil. So I have to give you my value theory first for you to show that misalignment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Perfect. Okay, so my value theory says that it's not the most important thing about a sentient creature is not what merely happens to them. It's about the total timeline of their life and where their life permanently ends. Meaning, if you were to judge an author of a narrative, and the first few chapters, let's say, there's a lot of bad things happening, but the end ends with this crescendo where there's victoriousness, there's redemption, there's beauty, and everything.
And this applies to animals. This applies to fucking rats. Really?
Everyone in the story actually endorses their entire existence that they live. They can look at their they can look at the total timeline, and they actually each subjectively come to the conclusion, I'm glad I was made, and I totally see what my suffering was for.
And this applies to rats. Rats are glad that they suffer because dog, kill me. This apply. What do you mean? This applies to the deer under the tree that he gave earlier? Didn't he literally already give an example that?
That's the particular I'm using with. So we have to judge. Hold on. Like John Hicks says, we have to judge the very nature of God's lovingness by what He does in the end, not these few time slices that we observe right now. For you,
I mean, I could see how this applies to what's up, CTV, to humans relatively easily, but watch Avatar. Which Avatar? There's a few different avatars out there.
To show that there's a problem, you have to show to me that the suffering of animals cannot be transformed, are intrinsically cut off from being transformed into a life that they will endorse. There's a couple of theses on the table. Okay, but sure, go ahead.
So are you talking about the end of their life is in their end of life on Earth, or are you talking about the afterlife?
The blue people.
Antemortem, postmortem.
Okay, because if you're just talking about life on Earth, then I would say that if you had an author writing a book and a character, if we were trying to figure out the relationship between that author and the person in the book, and that person in the book shows up for 5 seconds in the first chapter and is a child who almost immediately dies of cancer in an incredibly painful way, and there's no development, there's no sort of bringing back to life, and suddenly everyone's grateful for it. It is just this miserable, tragic experience. And I ask, well, what did the author not want to do for the story of the book, but want to do for that character?
Yes.
I think it'd be pretty damning. And also, when it comes to animals, we're talking about animals who are predated on from the moment that they begin existence.
Absolutely.
They sort of have disease.
Well,
zebras, when they're killed by lions,
pretty good,
are
yeah.
too big to be killed
I saw you talk to Peacekill yesterday, CTV. That was interesting.
So they die over minutes with their windpipes caught in the jaws of a lion. How can this be developing a zebra, which, by the way, probably doesn't even have the same kind of first-person conscious experience that humans do in order to sort of rationalize and abstract and learn from their sort of...
Yeah, I was going to say, this seems like it just seems like there's very clearly animals who are capable of suffering but don't have any capability to do what you're suggesting when it comes to being glad that they instrumentally suffered.
Pass and morally develop in that way. They just suffer. And what kind of God could oversee this?
Okay, so there's a lot of assumptions on the table again. Again, you're assuming a particular value system that I'm not laying
I'll tell you what
out.
I'm assuming here. What I'm assuming here is that a good God would not allow unnecessary suffering to obtain.
Okay, gotcha. So we can
Do
talk.
you agree with that?
We can talk about unnecessary suffering. We're talking about the justifying norms for suffering. You're saying it has to be in terms of necessity, which is an evil is only authorizable by God if it's in connection to a greater good or prevention of a greater evil. Correct?
If there's some kind of justification for allowing that
Yeah,
suffering.
but you're saying it's a necessary.
But I get it, you
connection.
suffer, but why?
What's the term of necessity?
Real.
So perhaps I should say unjustified instead of unnecessary.
Okay, so we both agree. I do not believe that God can authorize
Okay, so
justified
tell me
unjustified suffering.
Tell me how that example that I gave you, the deer with its leg
Right.
starving, is justified.
Because it's intrinsically redeemable, and the norms I'm working with is not this necessity condition that you're working with. Mine is about redeemable suffering, redeemability, or we call it
For the deer?
defeasibility. If that suffering can be defeated within the creature's life, and I'll define what I mean by defeat, which is that they can retroactively look back at what they went through and integrate it into their life history, where they look at their
Hold on,
life.
I have to interrupt because the example I gave you is one where the deer dies.
Yes, the deer dies. But here's the thing. Well, you're probably talking about this post-mortem example. Sure. I'm going to put one thesis on the table. There's two philosophers that defend exactly what this goes through. One defends that animals will be given a martyrdom status. Well, God will be able to present himself in a way to animals in the afterlife,
Okay.
such that in the same way you could give praise to a dog, and the dog emotionally recognizes that he's loved and that his life is worth living, right? To these animals that suffered like that, there's one view on the table, which is that God will give them a praiseworthy status where they will be able to actually
Sure,
see
can we
that.
talk about that claim? Because these animals are suffering for what? I mean, God might cause them to suffer
It's
a
not
bunch.
means-to-ends. This is not means-to-ends.
God might cause them to suffer a bunch and then essentially redeem them in the afterlife. But what for? Like, why do this? If I were to punch you in the face and then give you $20,000 afterwards, you might be grateful for the $20,000.
Yeah.
But why couldn't I just give you the $20,000?
Well, see, so that's assuming. So I saw your debate with Trent.
You've been voted out
All
by
right.
the majority.
Awesome,
Please
man.
return to your seat.
Good stuff. So close. Hey,
Nice to meet you. My
how's
name's
it going?
Hayden. How are you?
Hayden, nice to meet you.
Would you say that theism or atheism better account for the idea that suffering exists and a purpose for it?
Depends exactly what you mean, because of course
A
you might say that
purpose
the world
for it.
itself.
The purpose for it thing. I would expect that like a purpose for suffering, right, is probably more expected under theism than it is under atheism. But like I would also say that it doesn't seem to be as evident. Like again, evidenced by the deer example he gave earlier. It seems like there is like pointless suffering or whatever, or unnecessary suffering. Like
It's more expected on theism, and since suffering, needs the
I
existence
don't know
of
how
the
to
world, then
revive
theism,
the
but
dog.
granted the existence of a material world, let's say, I think atheism.
Okay, why does suffering exist at all? Like in an atheistic...
or are we immediately just going to go, well, actually, in order for suffering to exist, the material world has to exist. And why does that world exist at all? And why is it so finely tuned for life? And why is it? And what was the first
what is
cause?
the cause of suffering?
Oh, well, because however life began, it developed through a series of natural selection, which requires animals to develop senses that they wish to avoid in order to be more likely to survive. And that's why pain receptors evolve. In a world where not all of these pains are actually going to kill us, we're left with situations in which we're in a lot of pain but don't end up dying for it.
Would you agree that consciousness is necessary for suffering?
I would say probably, yeah.
Does atheism account for consciousness?
Yes, that's what I was talking about a moment ago. Perhaps not. Maybe theism
Kill
accounts
me.
better for consciousness than atheism
Okay.
does.
So if there is no consciousness, there is no suffering. Is that right?
That's probably true, yeah.
So if atheism cannot account for consciousness, then it cannot account for suffering. Would you agree with that?
So I think what we're doing here is we're sort of slightly shifting the goalposts. If you don't want to grant the existence of the material world before we start talking about this, we can do an argument from consciousness. But then we need to debate whether consciousness is explicable on atheism.
Well, is
What
it-
I'm going to say is this.
Sure.
What I'm going to say is this. Consciousness may seem to imply the existence of a conscious creator of the universe. We're here
I think, I'm not going to lie, guys. I think the dog bed is blown up.
talking about, I suppose we're talking about Christianity, and the claim was about God. But the God that you believe in, let's say, if we grant that there is a creator deity who sort of brings about the universe of conscious creatures, have you ever heard of the evil God hypothesis that Stephen Law popularized or came
No,
up with?
tell me it.
So the idea is that, like, imagine that there's a God who brings about the world and creates the world, but does it maliciously because he wants human beings to suffer. He brings about a world in order so that human beings will suffer. Right? That seems like a plausible hypothesis. And even if you think that consciousness points towards God, the kind of God that a lot of Christians think is a sort of necessary quality of God, which is to be all-loving, might not have to apply here.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
If Christianity were true, is it plausible that suffering is necessary for God's purpose?
Well,
for
if
his
Christianity
creation?
is true, then I think it must be necessary because there'd be no other explanation.
Okay, so we're not talking about whether or not Christianity is true.
But if you're asking me if it's plausible that Christianity is true and therefore suffering is necessary, I would say probably not. Because I don't
Okay.
think suffering should be necessary or could be necessary.
in an atheistic worldview, I would agree with you. It makes no sense at all. But okay, I would ask this question.
So can I ask you
Sure.
why then?
So which
if
is it
God
more
exists and wants to
expected
know
under,
everybody
like-
and wants to love everybody and does so for the sake of human beings, why he chose to imbue the world with so much suffering that is at least seemingly completely inexplicable?
Are you a father?
No.
I'm a father. I want my son to become just like I am, better than I am, I
Okay.
should say. I want him to become the best that he can be. Is it possible for him to reach his potential without suffering in his life?
Perhaps not, but there's
Okay, so suffering is necessary.
There are a few things I want to say.
Okay.
Okay. Firstly, that kind of moral development doesn't apply to non-human animals, as I've already said. Right? That does not account. That does not account
For the millionth time, he's only talking about animals fucking suffering here. We keep making arguments that apply to humans.
death of animals in the wild. Also, if I don't want to talk about your son because it's tragic to think about, but somebody else's son has suffered and died immediately as a result of that suffering, they don't get to develop in the same way.
I would agree that on a micro level, it's very hard to justify. And we can ask the question, why doesn't God intervene on all
So
of these
you might be able to
sufferings?
justify an amount of suffering, right? But the fact that there's so much gratuitous suffering in the world is what I think makes God's existence unlikely. There are some instances where maybe a certain amount of suffering brings about a certain amount of good in a situation. That, by the way, would count as a justification. But when a child dies of leukemia, and they're dead,
Could there be a purpose to it? What if the death of the child brings their parents to God?
then
to
perhaps
salvation?
then the parents should be grateful that their child got leukemia because it's doing the will of the Lord.
not
Come on, bro. That was the best thing you could come up with? Oh, come on. Come on. Come on. What if actually the child's death brings the parents to God? Okay, there's no other mechanism by which God could convince these people of his existence other than to give their kid leukemia? Really? Really, brother?
My next claim is that God commands genocide in the Bible.
Oh boy. I don't know.
Nice to meet you.
I haven't read Bart Ehrman yet. Okay, I have his books. I haven't read them yet. I know. My only opinions from this come from Alex O'Connor videos I've seen. Okay, and I guess, I mean, it comes up in other debates from time to time. But
This is a bummer of a claim, right? Like when you look at scripture, right?
I agree.
There's a myriad of problematic things we see in scripture, from genocide to misogyny to slavery, right? And I would say that we find genocide in scripture. I would argue, though.
Do you agree with my claim?
Yeah, I think it's in scripture. Yeah, I mean, I think it's in there.
Okay.
right?
Thanks for
okay.
watching, everybody.
Well,
Yeah, good stuff.
So, I mean, but here's what I would say I ought to do with this claim as a Christian, if you're okay with entertaining that idea, right? So we see mass murder in scripture, right? And so one of my greatest friends, Rabbi Josh Stanton, he's a rabbi, the Hebrew scriptures are his. That's where we're finding these genocides, right? And
Yeah, so to spell it out, we've got, I think that the two most problematic are in 1 Samuel 15, the destruction of Amalek, and in the book of Joshua, the destruction of Jericho and the destruction of Ai. So for the sake of the audience who might not know about this, in 1 Samuel, for example, the Amalekites are a Canaanite tribe. They're in the land that's been promised to Israel. Israel are instructed through the prophet Samuel. King Saul is told to completely destroy the Amalekites, to leave nothing alive that breathes, kill man and woman, child and infant, cattle and sheep.
just like Donald J. Trump is doing to Gaza right now. Thank you, single issue Palestine voters.
And in fact,
Goddamn.
when Israel does as they're instructed, they destroy Amalek. Except Saul decides to keep the king as a captive, and he also saves the best of the animals. The prophet Samuel comes to him and says, "What have you done?" And he says, "Well, we kept the best of the animals in order to sacrifice to the Lord." And it says twice that God regrets that he made Saul king. Why does he regret that he made Saul king? Because Saul didn't follow his commandment to completely destroy the Amalekites by keeping the king alive and by keeping the best of the livestock. Saul says, "We kept the livestock alive to burn as a sacrifice to the Lord."
Yeah.
And Samuel says, "What pleases the Lord more, burnt offerings or the following of his commands?"
Sure.
And so we know that we're talking about what I would define here as a genocide.
Yeah, so it's in there, right? And I would say this is a great place where things like progressive Christianity serve us quite well. Not in the idea that God is progressing, but humanity is progressing further to a greater understanding of God's ethic and justice. I would also say when I look at scripture, I would actually be opposite from most of my contemporaries here. I don't read it as 100% literal. Like, I don't need scripture to be a history book, a literal book. So I look and I have to say, well, what is this telling me? And it's a awful story. Might I say a shitty story for us to have to go through and navigate, right? And I would go back to my friend again, who is a rabbi, who we had this conversation just in friendship about how we reconcile.
Do they not like that he? Do they want to make like the way more unhinged argument that actually is actually okay because God has the authority to give and take away life? And
part of this
oh my
genocide, but
God,
he's talking about
Alex
in
has
the
the
way of
accent advantage, of course.
referencing in scripture, right? I wasn't around for it, but this is one that is in relatable human history that we can have family members that we're a part of, right? And for my friend who hasn't had this not compromise his faith, and that was a question I asked him, right? Like, this is a genocide that was against your people and your religion, and for people that really loved God on a deep and a profound level. Like, how is this not shaking your faith? And for him and for me and for many others, as you look at scripture, I mean, I think that God is ultimately always pulling us toward greater levels of justice. And we look into this story in history, like, I think people are recording a potentially historic genocide that they are trying to make sense of in their religious worldview. And so they're superimposing language for God.
Do you think that God commanded this to happen?
I am not super interested in that conversation, but I would say potentially.
Because for me, the problem is that if you have God explicitly commanding this to happen.
Okay, pause.
I think you're asking the Bible to do what it wasn't
Pause.
intended to do, is what I would say.
Sure. Hey, thanks.
You've been voted out. Please return to your
Appreciate it.
seat.
I'm sitting.
Okay, if he touched it first. If he touched it first, then yes.
I need to get down the adrenaline just a little bit after that run.
Yeah, I think what you bring is interesting. Like, I think, if we were to look at the literal definition of the Bible, I think we can see that God commanded a person to commit genocide. So I think we're aligned there.
You mean the definition of genocide?
Yes.
Yeah.
So with that being said, though, I think when we look at Christian theology in the full, when Adam and Eve decide to disobey God, technically we're
This
all
is true,
subjected to
Johnson.
death, subjected to the wages of sin, the penalty of sin. I'm not a perfect person. I deserve the worst, right? And that's because, and the only reason why I'm happily breathing is because, Jesus saved me, right? And so when we look at this pretense,
Who are the best 20v1 performances? I don't know. I've only watched a few of them. I watched the Leela Rose one about abortion. I watched the Destiny one. I watched the Charlie Kirk. It might actually have been. Dean. I feel like Dean did really well. Dean's was funny. Yeah, Dean. I feel like it probably was Dean.
I know this is a very unpopular thing. God can do whatever he wants, right? Whether it's, genocide.
Yes. Oh my God. I actually, you know what? I thought, I thought I was being hyperbolic when I said they were going to make the way more unhinged argument that actually God can just, command whatever or whatever. But, here we go. Let's go. Dean and Pete Buttigieg. Well, I guess I don't. I was thinking of. I did watch the Pete Buttigieg one. He did good. Yeah, for a politician especially, he did really good.
Talked about suffering and all these things.
So can I ask you a question then?
Yes.
Suppose that you woke up tomorrow and you've been sort of transported into Canaan. You wake up and you're a Canaanite.
Yeah.
And you think you haven't done anything particularly wrong, but you're a bad person, you're a sinner, right? And then the Israelites come knocking at the door, and you know that they've been sent by God. And they come to your door, and you say to yourself, well, I know that.
Why does he look so sad?
God, even though it's really horrible, God can do whatever he likes. So you say, please don't kill me, Mr. Israelite. Instead, let me first betray my family to you because I know it's the will of the Lord. Would you allow that to happen?
I will contest it with this, right? We all fall short of the glory of God. It says that in Romans, right? So whatever I'm subjected to, I'm not entitled to a good life. I think even me living is a gift from God. The fact that I can talk to you is a gift.
Do you think that applies to infants?
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. I know it's an unpopular opinion.
So you think infants are deserving of the treatment they're given in 1 Samuel?
I think because we all fell, yes.
I'm sorry, you've been voted out.
Sorry.
Please return to your
Kill me,
seat.
dog. Oh, they didn't let him speak as much, so maybe the majority does disagree with this argument.
Good to meet you.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Okay, I disagress. I'd love to look at the case of the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15.
Sure.
So 1 Samuel 15, it says, he uses that phrase, every man, woman, child, and then lists off the animals, right? So we presume that by the end of that, if only Agag and the animal comes back, that they're all dead.
And then they show up
Right,
later
again,
in chapter,
chapter 27 and in chapter 30. Even King Agag, his descendants come up in the book of Esther.
Yes.
Right. So if we're saying, just for example, we have verification that there are children related to the Amalekites who must have been there because it's Agag's children, where else would they be? And they're alive because his descendants go on through Haman, which comes up in Esther. So
Yeah.
how do you
There are a few
reconcile
things to say. Firstly, one of the points where some of the Amalekites come up again, it's explicitly said that these are people who escaped. These are people who escaped. And so it's possible that God commanded that all of Amalek was destroyed. And the word Haram there means utterly destroy. That might also involve a driving out of the land. So it's possible that some of them escaped, and that's where we get the descendants from. That seems totally plausible to me. The question is, did God command a genocide? By the way, genocide includes forcible expulsion from somebody's land in a case of ethnic cleansing. Sure. What I'm looking at here is, did God command the ethnic cleansing of the land of Israel from people like the Amalekites, people like Ai, people like Jericho? And I think the answer is clearly yes. For example, do you think that any innocent children, maybe let's not use the word innocent for theological reasons, do you think that any infants were killed in the destruction of Amalek?
I have no idea. I don't think that it's recorded.
Okay, but you think that God definitely commanded the killing of?
No, I don't. I think that's hyperbolic phrasing.
Hyperbolic. Okay.
I know. I heard you say it before. I heard you talk about this. You've heard that before, that it's hyperbole. But I think you can demonstrate it in Babylonian, Sumerian writings. Very similar.
Yeah.
There's an Egyptian stele which says that Israel was wiped out and their seed was utterly removed.
Yeah.
It was gone. And so we've got comparable phrases used in other ancient Near Eastern communities, in their historical texts that talk very similarly, but we know that the Jews persisted to exist in Israel, even though the Egyptians said that they were no more, and that text explicitly says man, woman, and child. That's hyperbolic language that even we used to say, for example, in World War II, there's those huge posters that were put up, every man, woman, and child is needed. I can read that and go,
Yeah, sure, but so imagine, for example, there's a discussion at the moment about whether Israel is committing a genocide in Palestine today.
Sure.
Now suppose a lot of people said, but you're killing children. And Israel said, yeah, but that's just a product of war. Imagine if we discovered that behind the scenes, Prime Minister of Israel had said, leave alive nothing that breathes. Kill everyone. Kill man, kill woman, kill children.
Just like he did. Just like, actually, wait, sorry. I won't blame anything on Netanyahu. Just like Donald J. Trump himself. My position is Israel wasn't committing a genocide until Donald Trump got into office. And then Donald Trump strong-armed Netanyahu into committing a genocide.
Child and infant. Kill the animals. Kill the donkeys. Don't leave anything alive that breathes.
Wait. No. What do you mean? Oh, fuck. End stream. Thanks, Ben Brody. I appreciate it. that'd be bad.
He was trying to sort of make a hyperbolic point. The fact that children are then dying as a result, I think that we could lay some blame at his feet. Here we have God saying that. Those are the words that are recorded. Also, on the point of hyperbole, when we get into the book of Joshua and the destruction of the nation of Ai, it's explicitly said that 12,000 people died that day. All the people of Ai, it says. It does imply that some people ran away, because it says, I have it here in Joshua chapter 8, when Israel had finished killing all of the men of Ai in the fields and the wilderness where they had chased them. And by the way, earlier it says, not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. Because Israel sort of draw them out of the city, and they pretend to run away. And Ai runned after them. It says, not a man remained in Ai. It then says, when Israel had finished killing all of the men in the fields and the wilderness where they chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, the Israelites turned around, returned to Ai, and killed everyone who was left. If there was not a man who was left in Ai who hadn't run out and been killed in the wilderness, when they turn around and kill everyone who's left, who is it that they're killing? It's the women, it's the children. We're then told that 12,000 people fell that day, all the people of Ai, and it says 12,000 men and women. So we know that women who were non-combatants were also killed. Even if there's hyperbolic language being used here, we know that we're being told that specifically 12,000 people died, including non-combatant women.
Okay, so I think, for example, in 1 Samuel 15, these are ancient texts. It's literature. So we don't like go over and above like how interpreting literature works. So even though like the text is saying this is what God said, well, it's still in a literary form.
Do you think God said that? Do you think it's accurate?
Well, I mean, I wasn't there. I didn't hear it. I think that...
Come on, bro. Kill me. Really? How hard do we have to cope? Come on. Just, it actually is like a, I think it unironically might be a better argument to just say, well, yeah, he said it, but he's God. He can do whatever. They deserved it because he's God and he can determine that, than it is to like try to do all this cope, even though it is a, it's obviously like a way stronger like reductio to say, hey, your God commanded this, right?
The Old Testament scripture is inspired, and I think that it doesn't fail in its representation of revealing God. Like, for example, like we've talked about in the New Testament, right? John chapter 2, he puts the temple expulsion moment at the beginning of his gospel. Do I think that John is actually concerned with the chronology there? No, I don't think that. I think it's a literary tool. Sure. And I think the Bible is full of that. They're literary texts, and they're assembled in a certain way. So I don't think that necessarily that means that God was the one using the hyperbole, but that the scribe recording the events and sort of summarizing what happened says, okay, so God commands to attack the Amalekites. But does that mean that God is the one who did the hyperbolizing? I don't. Do you think it would be problematic?
You mentioned the cleansing of the temple, and you said that even though the chronology is off, the point is recorded. If we had a story of the cleansing of the temple, if we discovered some early manuscripts, some version of John, where Jesus goes into the temple, he starts cleansing the temple, flipping over tables, and then he starts beating up children. He just starts punching them because he's so angry, right? What would you think of that? You'd probably think either it didn't happen, or if you prove that it did happen, that Jesus was less moral than you thought he was, or if for some reason people believe that that's what he did, I think it'd be a problem for you. And I think that if you're...
Are you like a big atheist? I mean, like, religion is not like my topic that I read a lot into or study in, but I am like, yeah, I mean, like, I'm an atheist, and it's not a super high conviction take, but it is a high-ish conviction take, right? Like, I don't really like argue religion, but I do like my goat Alex O'Connor. Okay, so we stan Alex O'Connor here.
Good God here. The fact that even this is reported as something that he said, and this is part of the Jewish tradition that basically nobody disputes, is at least theologically accurate.
Right, but you've yet to demonstrate children being killed in the Old Testament. Yep. You haven't actually shown that. So yes, I would find that to be problematic, but you haven't shown innocent children being killed in the
Old
Testament.
We know that there's a command to kill children.
Right, but we just talked through all of that.
So you think God was hyperbolizing?
I think the scribes hyperbolizing.
I think personally might be as well be an atheist or rejecting any sort of dogmatic religious version of God. I mean, well, technically, depending on what, I mean, I say I'm an atheist, technically, like I'm an agnostic atheist, right? Like, but
the Old Testament is
right. So like that's not the same thing though. I'm not saying
we're not reading into all the argument. Not all. I want to say all the arguments, but like, I don't know, if someone like does Kalam or whatever, I'm gonna be like, oh, composition fallacy. Oh, I mean, I've watched Alex O'Connor's videos on basically all the his old playlist and all the arguments, because I used to watch him even when I was relatively young.
Saying the scribe has a command.
So where did they get that command from?
From God, delivered through a prophet. So,
but did God say to the prophet Samuel, "Leave alive nothing that breathes, kill every man and woman"?
I don't necessarily know that I would think that.
Yeah, because if he did, then we've got the command to kill innocent children. If he didn't, then we've got a problem of the accuracy of the Old Testament.
No, I don't agree with that at all. Like I said, it's literature, right? So God can say something in the recording of the event.
How do you
employ literary devices like hyperbole, what I think is happening. I want to go to Jericho, what you're talking about there, because you talked about that a lot more.
I think, for example, like with Jericho, we have all the reason to believe that Jericho is inaccurate. It's just a literary device.
I think that's the case. I think that's historically accurate. And so when we're not like just looking at Israel going in and, you know, just sort of like killing
I've heard this
for no reason, right? It's a military conquest. I think you'd be hard pressed to find
That's what you think. Until Donald Trump came into office and made Netanyahu. Actually, technically, I guess they're still at a ceasefire right now. Although they are, I think currently, actually, I haven't read into it yet. They're going back and forth on who is violating it. Watch Alex O'Connor old skateboard vids. I feel like I've seen old videos of him playing for a band. What's the best argument for God? I don't know. Whatever Sample was saying earlier. I don't know. I don't remember what the best one is. I would say probably. I don't know. I think there are decent cases you can make for the theological argument. Is that what it's called? The fine-tuning one. I think that's probably, I don't know.
Single nation in all of human history
Probably
that was founded
the
without
most
violence.
intuitive one.
I don't,
right?
That's never happened. I understand why you would say it's problematic that God is instructing that, which I get.
God would not instruct that. I mean, like, my country is thought of as beginning in 1066 with the Norman invasion, right? And like, it may be, I can imagine there was some report that said that, the king was shouting, kill them and then go and kill their wives and then go and kill their children, show no mercy. I can totally see someone saying that and them not being taken literally. But if God says that, this is still part of the eternal scripture of God that people have in their pews, that's in the hotel rooms. I don't know so much anymore in secular America. If you open it up to a random page, especially given the undertones of what's happening in the world right now.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not,
Biogenesis is a good agnostic. I don't know. I don't think you mean abiogenesis? I don't know. I think abiogenesis is pretty plausible based on all the research we've done. I mean, it seems like it to me. Yeah.
Genesis, when God leads Abraham to the promised land, he says to them, I'll bring you back here in several generations when the Amorite sin is filled up. Like that language when the bucket is all the way filled.
Yes, they're sinful people.
Right. So I understand why that can be problematic, but when I read the text, I believe that God is allowed to judge people, being that he created everything, and he's allowed to use human beings to do that. Including sinful human beings.
Okay, pause. You've been voted out by the majority.
Thanks,
Please return to your seat.
All right, really quick, before we begin the discussion, I'm going to give you this gift and also use my point for the topic of genocide. Okay. Because you're saying that God commands genocide, correct? So you're making this God sound like a very hating God.
I want to know what the gift is.
That, like, commands, hateful, just genocidal.
Like genocidal. Okay, so here's this personal gift I would like to give to you. It says, cast your anxieties because he cares for you. The way how you're portraying this God, when you say that very broad statement of God commanding genocide, I disagree, because in the beginning of the Bible, God is love. At the end of the Bible, God is love. Our fellow peer, he stated that our God is a very just God. So can we argue that or say that even though this God perhaps, like, in the beginning of the Old Testament, that's where the genocide occurs a lot. We can also say that...
So do you think genocide does occur?
If it did say that in the Bible, I just want to say that, like, these people also went to heaven. It's not like they're getting, like, killed and punished in that moment. He's also taking these souls of the women and children and taking them with him, if that's the case. But the whole argument is about God, like...
Okay, I have a question then. Do you think it's okay to kill people because they'll eventually just go to heaven anyway after you kill them?
It's not about killing, it's just like...
Are people who get abortions doing their unborn children a favor by killing them in the womb, therefore giving them...
True. Honestly, there's got to be good responses out there somewhere, but like, if you are Christian and you have cancer, why the fuck would you? I don't understand. Why the fuck would you like ever do chemotherapy? If you honestly, truly 100% believe that you're like with a very high probability going to heaven after you die, then like, why are you putting yourself through like months of chemotherapy just to like, if not like die anyway, or sorry, if not live, then like just extend your life by, a few years or a few months even. Like, that never made sense. Maybe there's arguments out there somewhere, but like the best I can think of is like, oh, well, I want to like spend time with my family. It's like, motherfucker, you're going to heaven for eternity. The 50 years in between when you die and your wife dies is nothing within eternity. And presumably, I don't know if all the talk of like, angels like looking down on you, like, I don't know, can you not like watch them? Can I not watch my family? Don't I have a TV in heaven that streams down the terrestrial world? I mean, like,
this is a different approach to genocide, but I just want to say, like,
I don't think
how much religion do you think is trying to cope with death? I think that's probably somewhat of a bigger reason why religion initially started. I think there's also, I would say like for ordinary people, or nominally religious people, I think that's probably, 10 to 30%. I think actually it might be more for ordinary people, but do you think the angel stream have ads? Only ones they like, right? Only ones. religions are obsessed with death. Well, I just don't I don't know. I mean, like, there are like decent philosophical arguments you can make for theism. So like, it's not for like people, you know, for like actual Christian philosopher people, like it seems to be like they're not just trying to cope with death, but like for ordinary people, a lot of them is probably a decent amount of it is probably just like, I want to fucking have an easy answer to what happens, like to when I die,
and then sort of just make up for it with the fact that you send them to heaven afterwards. I mean, maybe you do, but the problem is that the Israelites are also
self-deletion. Yeah, but I've heard people make conflicting arguments. So that's why I said like just not do chemotherapy. It's also, I mean, it's hard to, I don't even know where you draw the line between like suicide and just like refusing medical treatment, right? But I don't know. Like I've heard like people argue shit all the time about the Bible. I've heard people argue that like suicide actually doesn't necessarily mean you go to hell. But yeah.
Israelites are sinful, they get the prophet of God with literal stone tablets telling them how to correct their path. The Canaanites are sinful people, and when they're sinful people, they get the Israelites coming in and wiping them out of
But
their own
our
hand.
God is a just God, and I feel like even though they're sinful
All
people,
right,
they have.
pause. You've been voted out.
Thank you.
Back to your chair.
His claim is that there is
Great.
insufficient evidence to believe in the resurrection.
See, like I said, Bart Ehrman-Pilled. I'm excited for this one, baby. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay. How's it going?
This is a really interdisciplinary question for the resurrection of Jesus. And in my experience, it kind of boils down into two categories. The prior probability of the resurrection of Jesus and the data itself.
So what I'm really interested in is the historical case for the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay, I want to ask a clarifying question because I would love to talk about the data. But if I were to give you a model of the Gospels that I would call like the historical reportage model, which say something along the lines of the authors of the Gospels were close to the times and places of the historical Jesus. They rooted their historical work in eyewitness testimony and did not feel the freedom to make up historical facts. Because of that, we can extract all the testimonies from these Gospels, and we have access to what the original eyewitnesses actually said and did.
Okay, so who do you think are the eyewitnesses that...
Well, I mean, I think he said lived close in time to Jesus, right? I think the earliest estimates is like 30 years after his death, right? And then also, we don't even have it's not like we have the original manuscripts, right? It's like we have translations of translations of translations of truth. I'm Bart Ehrman-Pilled, as you can tell.
The testimony is being based on.
So this is where I'm not a walking encyclopedia, but I would say if you look at all the testimonies, we have 21 unique testimonies that are going to be polymodal in nature. They're going to have semblances of independence and interdependence and some dependence.
You heard the invisible farmer philosophical argument?
No, I haven't. Would that be enough for you to say the probability that the resurrection happened relative to any other countering theory is higher?
No, I don't think so.
So that tells me then that one, it could be the prior probability still. That's an issue. Because if that's not enough evidence...
It's not that. I think that the authors of the Gospels, specifically on the resurrection, can't be trusted to be giving an accurate account of what happened.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking if we had this historical reportage model, and that was true.
Sure, if it were true that they were reporting historical events, then it would be a historical event, yeah.
So let me clarify
I don't think that they are.
Yeah, I got where you're coming from. Let me clarify one thing here. The historical reportage model does not entail what the reporting actually happened. All I'm saying is that we can extract from there is that these were the actual eyewitness testimonies to the risen Jesus.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think that Jesus is the only person, outside of the people that Jesus and the apostles rose from the dead, do you think that he's the only person in human history that's risen from the dead?
Yes.
Okay, so Matthew's Gospel, in Matthew chapter 27, says that at the time of the death of Jesus, the graves of Jerusalem opened, and the holy ones got out of their graves, and then, interestingly says, then after the resurrection, appeared to many. Many of them walked around appearing to many. Do you think that that happened?
So I would just say that if the historical reportage model is true, then yes.
So you think
that literally happened, dog? That literally happened, and then there's like there's no other historical accounting of this. Like
also talking about resuscitations most likely, not resurrections.
Yeah, but what we're talking about here is the graves of Jerusalem opening and many people getting out of their graves, walking around Jerusalem and appearing to many people.
If I say yes, what's at stake
If this happened, this would be the most extraordinary event that's ever happened in human history. And yet...
And then you're going to make an argument from silence from there.
Some arguments from silence do work. It is
I
not
understand that, but that's only one piece of evidence that you're going to use.
Anywhere else. It's not reported in any...
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I understand.
It's not in Josephus. It's not in Acts.
That's one data
It's not
point.
anywhere.
Let's just... Well,
but hold on, let me finish this thought, because this is important. Most Christian scholars, I think, so people like Dale Allison, for example, believe that this didn't actually happen.
Well, I'm not interested in what Allison's going to say.
The door that this opens...
What I'm interested in is what the data says. So if we have the historical reportage model, right?
But you keep saying we have this model.
That's fine. Let me give you some evidence for the historical reportage model.
Sure.
If this model is true, one of the things I would expect to see would be things like undesigned coincidences within the gospel.
Also, I mean, like, they haven't moved to the priors argument, but like, yeah, I'm gonna have quite a few priors against, even if the historical reportage model is true, quite a few priors against all, the graves in Jerusalem opening and everyone dancing around like it was Thriller. Especially if that's not reported anywhere else. Yeah, my priors against that are gonna be pretty high, buddy.
Yeah.
Tiny little interlocking
Okay, for the
details.
sake
I
of
don't
time.
think that's maybe as some maybe they'll move that argument and he'll have a good point there. I don't know. We'll see. But I think that's entirely plausible that that my prior is going to be high there.
I understand what you're saying. So I think that a lot in the Gospels is historically reliable and a lot is not. Things like Undesigned,
sure,
for instance,
sure.
is
Are
like
you
really
taking a pericope by pericope approach to this, or how is what methodology?
I'm taking
are you
it
using?
story by story. I don't think that the
I
graves.
think I don't think that's a good methodology.
I don't think that the graves of Jerusalem were opened. I don't
So,
think that there were people
that's
walking
fine. I
around the city of
understand where you're
Jerusalem.
coming
But if
from.
that's the case, then that means that at least the author of Matthew is willing to invent
I don't
stories
think that's the
of
case.
resurrection
Well,
in order
hold
to make
on.
a
You're making a
theological
big
point.
inference there, right?
Well, hold on.
Because
Okay,
I know you like to talk. For instance, you like to talk about the flight to Egypt, and you
Sure,
like to say
yeah.
that Matthew invented the flight to Egypt.
Luke.
No, Luke's the one that doesn't mention it. Matthew's the one that mentions it.
Sorry, Matthew.
It's okay, it's
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
Yeah, Matthew, and then typically the way you run
Damn,
this argument,
owned,
Matthew invented the
destroyed,
flight to
Alex
Egypt.
destroyed.
Luke doesn't mention it. The reason why Luke doesn't mention it is because it didn't happen. Matthew mentions it, and he tells us why to put Jesus into prophecy. Here's a counter hypothesis.
Sure,
What
sure,
if it's just the case that Matthew is not making up historical facts, and he's doing some sort of midrash? And what I mean by this is that he's looking at this historical thing that happened, the flight to Egypt, and taking this Hosea passage, which, by the way, would be a kind of a clunky passage to use if you wanted to make up a historical fact for prophecy. Because that Hosea passage is not inherently...
I think we might be
Let me
getting
land
slightly
here.
off. But I have to be allowed to speak here. I think we're getting slightly off topic. The problem with the birth narrative story is not just that a story is being invented to fulfill prophecy, although we're told that that's why it's done. The problem is that it contradicts the other account. That
Well,
the
I'm
family
totally fine with
the
that.
family
So
stay in
if you look at the birth narratives altogether, I think there's room for one discrepancy, and that is
Egypt
that
and
Luke
Jerusalem?
doesn't mention it.
Well, Luke says that they go to the temple.
What?
Luke says that they go to the temple.
Yeah,
So hold on.
I'm going to agree with you.
Let me finish it.
Yeah.
Luke says that the family go to the temple and present Jesus in Jerusalem. Matthew says that they go to Egypt. They're very far away from each other. And we're told that they stay in Egypt until after the death of Herod. This is a contradiction.
So again, I actually agree.
Okay, pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your
Damn.
seat.
Well,
Good to see you.
Okay, so historical case for the resurrection.
Well, before we get there, actually, my main contention had to do with the example that was just brought up about the flight to Egypt.
I mean, we can talk about it, but what I really want to know here is how we know that the resurrection.
God damn it, bro.
So can I start with the question for
Yes,
you, for
please.
example? Do you believe that the graves opened and that the holy ones were walking around the city of
Yes.
Jerusalem, appearing to many people?
Yes.
Why is this not reported in any other gospels, any other historical account, anywhere? Given that
understand.
this is the most extraordinary thing that's ever happened in human history.
Right. So the
Also, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt,
Please.
but also crucially, Matthew says at the time of Jesus' death, there was a huge earthquake,
Yes.
the second earthquake, the graves opened, and that then the holy ones appeared to people after the resurrection
Right.
to many. So there's this very, very strange passage, which seems strange on the surface, but
Right,
also
right.
says that the graves opened at the time of the crucifixion, but they weren't walking around and appearing to people until after the resurrection. It seems confused, it seems contrived, unless they were like hanging out dead in open graves for like 3 days until they got up or something. It's a very, very strange passage, which I think has no historicity behind it.
Sure, but that's not the same as the claim you originally brought up, which is the resurrection of Christ himself.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is if that's
So
unlikely.
if I were to, I understand. So if I were to connect the two, what I would say is the historicity for the resurrection of Christ has the same type of data that the historicity of the resurrection of these holy ones in Matthew, because the appearances of these holy ones and the appearances of Christ correlate. They correspond. And so the reports of their appearances is just as likely, like for example, you're aware of the passage in obviously Corinthians 15, which is one of the earliest attestations of the the formal traditional creed that states about the resurrection of Christ and the appearance to 500, and this states within 5 years of Christ's resurrection. So
Well, arguably, yeah. I mean,
Right,
it's
but-
unclear. I mean, are you?
as I
referencing-
understand, you do grant that possibility.
I grant that Paul's very.
oh my God. Okay, hold on. They're having a good conversation. You know what I really want to know? I want to know Menard's argument against it. Menard's Islamic. I want to know Menard's argument against the resurrection. I don't know why. That came to mind right now, but oh my God, wouldn't that be
early? I don't know about 5 years.
Sure, but the tradition on which it's based, because he's quoting a very specific midrashic formula.
I agree.
Okay, I can
And
concede
then
that.
Paul inserts
That's
himself
fine.
into that formula. He says,
Sure,
finally, he
that's
appeared to
fine.
me. So at some point, the formula stops and
Yeah,
Paul's own words
actually,
begin.
that demonstrates the proof of the formula rather than subverts it.
Sure, but I don't know where the formula ends and Paul begins.
That's fine. My point is to say that there are early attestations that are no different in nature than the attestations of the holy ones that rose from the grave.
So crucially,
so if you reject the resurrection of Christ based on the data of eyewitness testimony, then of course you're going to reject the resurrection or the resuscitation, let's say, either one of the holy ones based on the eyewitness testimony.
Well, it's fine if you
that is of the
believe
same
it. I just know
nature.
that a lot of Christians don't, so
I
I'd like to
understand.
establish that first. Otherwise,
Sure.
it's irrelevant.
Muslims
to
don't believe in the resurrection? No,
Yeah,
of
sure,
course
okay,
they don't.
forget about
Yeah,
the graves opening thing.
Sounds good. So
because they don't believe in the divinity of Jesus, right? That's my understanding. They just believe that he was a prophet like any other.
let's
right?
go to Hosea if you don't mind. So in Hosea, you have actually a fantastic example of how the prophecies of Christ are being fulfilled at deeper, multivalent levels, right? It's a metalepsis of prophetic fulfillment. So to answer the discrepancy between Luke and Matthew, first of all, you have the time of the purification rite for the mother. It lasts 33 days after the circumcision of the infant. And therefore, it's a 40-day period before they're presented at the temple. This takes place before they flee to Egypt. Now, I understand the difficulty in the verse right after Luke's pericope about the presentation of the temple with Zechariah, because it says that they returned to Nazareth.
Yes, he says that afterwards they returned to Nazareth.
I understand.
Maybe they went to Egypt in between.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
But can I just say that that may be the case? I think that's an unnatural
I think he was the
reading of
strongest
the case, but
prophet.
I'll just grant you from that. Let's say.
I mean, I don't know that. I would assume that's not true, right? Wouldn't they? I don't know what you mean by strongest, but
narratives don't contradict each other. That's fine. Let's say that the birth.
I would assume they placed the probably Muhammad is the big one for them, right? I don't know. I don't know much about Islamic studies. Okay,
are not historically
maybe I'm wrong there.
Evidence of the resurrection I'm looking for right now.
Sure, I understand.
But I get where you want to
jump on.
But there are contradictions in the Gospels.
Okay.
Well, that's a whole nother
pause.
claim.
So sorry.
Yeah,
You've been
no
voted
worries.
out by the majority. Please return
Thank
to
you.
your
Appreciate
seat.
Dog. Okay. Well.
So the first thing I want to ask is, do you have to have evidence to prove that something's real? To believe something's real?
Broadly, I think that can't be the case, because there are all kinds of things we believe without evidence, such as the existence of the external world and the laws of logic, fine. But when it comes to historical claims, I think that, yes, we need some burden of proof.
And how much historical claims do you need in order for you personally to believe that Jesus is real?
I believe that Jesus was real. To believe that he was resurrected is a different thing. I think I would need probably more corroborative accounts of specific appearances that didn't contradict each other.
Okay, what if I told you that Jesus still is revealing himself to people today?
That's fine.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, she's from the intro. Oh my God.
Do you think he's doing so in bodily form to multiple people at once?
Okay, so this is the thing, is I believe Jesus is still alive today and that he is revealing himself, he's healing and delivering people, and it would be absolutely impossible.
They had to bring in one mentally ill person to balance out the other Christians who at least, some of them made okay points.
For Jesus' resurrection if Christians didn't have power. So if a Christian was powerless, then Jesus wouldn't have resurrected. But because there's still deliverance, miracles, healing, signs, wonders.
Heads up, we've detected your stream belonging to someone else. Your stream will be temporarily blocked. Goodbye, YouTube Shorts. Bye-bye.
Visions and dreams, that's evidence and that's living proof that Jesus resurrected, because if he didn't resurrect, he wouldn't have sent his Holy Spirit as an advocate to fill the believer to operate and to be empowered to walk in signs, wonders,
along with the wealth of other religious traditions which also have their visionaries too. As an outsider, I can understand as a Christian, if you hear the story that someone's seen Jesus, you might think that's plausible and think, praise Christ. For me, I don't find it convincing, because I see it happen all over the place. We see all kinds of visions. We see people seeing ghosts, we see people seeing Jesus, we see people saying all kinds of gods. And by the way, that also I don't think would really indicate the historicity of this particular resurrection account of Jesus of Nazareth.
I had Jesus appear to me 3 years ago. I was in my room and he appeared to me and he came and he gave me a big hug. He lifted me up, he turned me around, and the joy was unlike this world. And I'm telling you, like, he's so real because I've physically seen him. But you know, I could say all day my tangible encounters with Christ. I've seen signs, wonders, miracles. I've seen paralyzed people walk out of wheelchairs, and not over time. I've prayed over people and I've seen broken bones go back into place. I've seen people delivered of demons, like the very things in the Bible.
How many miracles has this one girl witnessed? We can't have a more like dispersed accounting of miracles, you know? Like, thanks Kelsey for the follow on Twitch. I appreciate it.
Come to life, and my life has been tangible evidence of the living God, of the living resurrection, that he has risen, because I wouldn't be able to see or do any of that stuff unless that happened. But as much as I can tell you it, right, it's
basically they didn't want the criminals back and was trying to put many roadblocks as possible, since they're anti-socials who will cost Colombia to deal with. That is there. I mean, that's not what they said. Are you just assuming that's the motive behind it? I don't know. I mean, were we not deporting criminals before? Are we only deporting criminals now on the military jets? Or, yeah, is that in the Ryan Macbeth video? I'll watch the Ryan Macbeth video after this. But I would assume we were, I don't know if the people are different that we're deporting now versus the people we were deporting before.
If you want to believe it or not.
So I'm fascinated by...
So like 3 hours ago?
By your account. I always love to know what people see when they have these kinds of visions.
What's up, Birdman?
Physicality, how Jesus appeared, did he fade away, did he walk out of the room, did he knock on the door, this kind of stuff. But the crucial point is that if I had such a religious experience, I have no doubt that it would probably turn me into a Christian, and God willing, it will happen one day. That would be awesome. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet. And as far as that goes to convincing anybody else, people will say that's not evidence, and it's not, but it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be for you, it's supposed to be the reason that you have to believe in God and trust.
They still don't want them. Birdman, they still don't, I don't think they've changed their position. They still don't want the military jets landing there.
The best reason you can have for believing in God. Unfortunately, that's not going to do very much for me, because these stories of sort of demons being driven out and this kind of stuff, you know, I think the only thing that demons seem to be more scared of than Jesus is a camera. You know, if I can see this kind of stuff happen, maybe that would increase my credence, but until it does, I just have to accept that that's something you experience, that like...
Birdman, he didn't say anything in that tweet that was him changing his position. They still don't want, They sent private jets. Because their position was they didn't want the military jets landing. They're still, Colombia is still imposing tariffs. Colombia is imposing the retaliatory tariffs on us for the tariffs that we're putting on them.
Apparent visions of the disciples and other people that you've already mentioned. I don't know what's happening there. I have to suspect it's some kind of psychological phenomenon until I'm shown otherwise.
Guys, I'm sorry.
Hey, so nice to meet you.
Thank you.
I like the Sam Harris has the good quote, like, if I said I talked to God through a hair dryer, or God spoke to me through a hair dryer yesterday, and told me to do whatever, people would call me crazy. And he's like, I fail to see how the addition of a hair dryer makes it any more insane to say that, like, God spoke to me.
Next assertion is that Jesus never claimed to be God.
Well, we'll see, Birdman.
So, man,
Coley. So talk to me. Where does Jesus claim to be God?
Yeah, so I'm curious, when you say that, are you including the book of John?
So I think that the book of John is probably the least historically reliable in this case. So I'm talking about the historical Jesus.
Yeah.
I do think that there are a number of instances where Jesus appears to claim to be God in John's gospel.
Okay.
But even if we think that he actually said that, I still think that there's reason to believe that he wasn't claiming to be God in the sense of being identical with Yahweh.
When you talk about the historical Jesus, what else do you pull from other than the gospels of things that he might have said?
The things that he might have said, we only really have the gospels.
Okay.
There are multiple sources within the gospels.
What do you date it at?
Around 70 AD.
Okay, yeah.
I sort of go with the scholarly consensus. And so you have also a bunch of sources, the unique sources to Matthew and Luke.
Yeah.
You also have this potential source called Q.
Yeah.
The guys getting killed. I saw
so we're
that.
trying to figure out what the historical Jesus actually said.
Oh, Type on
We've got
Turtle.
multiple sources all claiming that he said the same thing.
Oh, Carter, you're my favorite streamer. Oh, I appreciate it, Carter. Thanks.
The reason to think that he actually said that.
Wow.
Claims like, before Abraham was, I am and the Father are one. Anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. Only appear in the Gospel of John, not in any of our other sources, which I think makes them less historically reliable.
Well, I like the claim. I got to come at it a little bit different approach because I think that the gospel writers are claiming that Jesus is God.
Sure.
Let's just go with Mark. As Mark starts, he talks about John the Baptist preparing the way for the Lord. Right. What is your response for that? Because ensuing Jesus comes.
I've no problem saying that Mark is intending to portray Jesus as God. It's not entirely clear, but I have no problem just granting that for the sake of this conversation. I think that the belief that Jesus is God is something that developed in early Christianity after Jesus died. I think there's nothing that Jesus said himself that can make us confidently say that he was walking around claiming to be God.
What do you need in order to believe that Jesus is God? Because even if we take kind of this development in the Gospels, we can go before that. So would you say Paul's letters like Philippians and Colossians, would you say they were written before the Gospels?
Yes, they were written before the Gospels.
So I'm trying to remember I've listened to Bart Ehrman talk about fucking Paul's letters before. God, I'm assuming Alex is going to mention it. God, I don't remember.
If we're going before the Gospels, we have Paul claiming that Jesus is God in Philippians 2, where he's saying he was in the form of God, or maybe like a better translation would even be the essence or the nature of God.
Yeah, the problem I think with sort of quote mining in this respect is that there are quotes that point us in either direction, even in the Gospel of John. So Paul, for example, says that there is one God, which is the Father, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, seeming to separate them. Jesus says things like, my Father is greater than I am. He says things like, nobody knows the hour, not even the Son knows the hour, but only my Father in heaven. He says when he's crucified in the first two Gospels, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? I could point to these and say, these are Jesus claiming that he's separate from God.
Well, there is a distinction from the Father and the Son. So
sure.
We're not, but instead of quote mining, I could just quote the whole thing. That though he was in the form of God, didn't count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men.
Sure. So I also have no problem saying that Paul thought that Jesus was God.
Okay,
my assertion is that
that's actually super clarifying for me, because then my question is, what piece of evidence do you now need in order to believe that Jesus claimed to be God? Like, what is it for you that you would be like, you know what, that convinces me?
Jesus in his own words saying that I am God.
Right, but he does that in John.
Where?
Before Abraham was, I am.
Sure, so before Abraham was, I am. First, as I've said, it only appears in the Gospel.
What's that even, I don't even remember if that was if this was the thing. There's one of them that wasn't in the original manuscripts, like that we have, early manuscripts from, and it seems like it was added later on to the New Testament and not even in the original manuscript. It might have been it might have been that one.
John, we don't know if the
But he at least said it once, and the claim is that he never did.
If he actually said that, if he was going around claiming to be God in explicit terms,
that's a great.
Why is it that none of the other gospel writers thought it was a relevant detail to mention?
It's difficult to now deal with it because you are acknowledging.
Okay, pause. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no,
You
that's
voted
great.
out by majority.
Well.
Great to meet you too. I'm in charge here. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Learning more about our God, that knowing like what happened in the Old Testament, he needed to have a representative to humble himself during these trials of the early beginnings of the Old Testament.
For the sake of time, I really need Jesus claiming to be God.
So my point is that he sent Jesus to be that human figure to represent God so he could humble himself in his own creation.
Okay, so I don't think she could hear the words coming out of his mouth because it actually has nothing to do with whether or not once God did that, if Jesus claimed to be God. That's what he wants right now. That's what he.
So where does Jesus say that I am that person? I am God.
When he claims to say, I am the light, I am the way, follow me, I am your God.
Jesus says, I am your God.
I am the light. I feel like
so he says that, but you just said, I am your God. I don't think Jesus says that.
My apologies on misrepresenting like the whole entirely of the
Why
words
none of these
in that
people
verse.
arguing for neoliberal Christianity?
But he's still
Good
claiming
question.
that he is the light that has that connection to that higher God.
Absolutely.
And I feel like with that connection
to that higher God.
Yes, that he is in that physical form. I also want to say with the Virgin Mary, he has no father, and the angel blessed him with what he was saying
According
earlier.
to two mythical birth narratives.
Yes.
Which, by the way, the Gospels don't seem to have any knowledge of. Well, hold on. With the virgin birthing that's come up twice now, at one point, Jesus' family, in Mark's Gospel, Jesus' family come up to him and say that they think he's lost his mind, which is a very strange thing for his family to say if there was a virgin birth that was known about.
And for the sake of flags, I just want to emphasize that Jesus is that human God form, that he needed to humble himself so he can truly understand how humans work in his own creation.
I just want to know how you know that was Jesus.
I want to emphasize that as well, just by the very teachings that he said and how
All right, pause. You've been voted out. Please return to your seat.
Yes.
What's up, Alex?
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Big fan. I think that the general narrative of the Bible is the soon coming Messiah. Obviously, there's some discrepancies and disagreement.
One British atheist versus 25 IQ, low IQ Americans is too easy. That is kind of true. Again, Alex does have the accent advantage.
On the whole notion of whether Jews believe that the Messiah was God or not. But if we're looking at the New Testament as a whole, there seems to be this narrative from the beginning of the Gospels all throughout Acts that the religious officials and everybody around this Jesus figure is trying to do away with this up and coming revolution or whatever. Where you specifically noted with the blasphemy that Stephen so-called did. I don't believe that they stoned him because he was claiming to be God. I think they stoned him because he was reaffirming this narrative that was so antithetical to the whole entire time period.
What's this got to do with Jesus claiming to be God? I have no problem with saying that Jesus was claiming to be the Messiah, the Christ, and that the Jewish authorities saw that as a threat, and that the Roman authorities certainly saw it as a threat that he was claiming to be the King of the Jews. Those were the charges that he was actually crucified on, King of the Jews. Where does Jesus claim that he's God?
I'm just going to go back to John because it's the strongest source, and you have the multiple instances of I am. Like even if it's just what you said earlier with exactly how you quoted it. He says before Abraham, and Abraham in Jewish tradition and culture seems to be this forefather of their faith. So it's like, how are you putting a man, just any man, above Abraham?
Well, he's not just any man. He's not claiming to just be any man.
No, I'm not saying
there's any old man, and then there's God.
I'm saying that Abraham's statement reaffirms that I am. That you can't.
Again, I feel like it might have been this one. Was before Abraham was I am in the original manuscripts. It's disputed as to whether it's in the original manuscripts. What is it actually linked to? I don't trust the Google AI. Well, I trust Wikipedia though. Because the King James Version, but modern English notes that it's not present in the most reliable early manuscripts of John, and therefore suggests it's unlikely to have been part of the original text. H.W. Watkins notes that Jewish scribes, verse 3, are not referenced elsewhere in this gospel until recently. It was not thought that any Greek church father had taken note of the passage before the 12th century, but in 1941, a large collection of the writings of this guy was discovered in Egypt, including a reference to, I don't know how to pronounce that, that's being found in several copies. Now considered established, this passage was present in its usual place in some Greek manuscripts known in Alexandria and elsewhere before the 14th century or 4th century onwards. But I don't even think. Yeah, I think it is still questionable or disputed whether it was actually even in the original manuscripts from John, or if it was added later on. And again, John, like Alex has said, is like the most theologically motivated synoptic gospel anyway, right? So
just say before Abraham, because Abraham is the beginning of the Israeli timeline. Like this is the beginning of their faith. So to say that.
So for what it's worth, I don't think that Jesus, the historical Jesus, actually said this. But even if he did, saying before Abraham was ego eimi, certainly seems to imply that he is maybe eternal, at least existed before his bodily form. That's pretty weird. But claiming to be God is a different thing. As I say, when Jesus walks on the water, the disciples think that they've seen a ghost. And what does Jesus say to them? Do not be afraid, ego eimi, which most Bibles translate as it's me. Because sometimes saying ego eimi.
Okay, pause. You've been voted out by the majority.
Good to see you again.
All right. Two things. Have you heard of the Cloud Rider motif?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, the Cloud Rider motif.
Yeah. Okay. Then I'm assuming you've heard of like the two powers in heaven motif.
No.
Okay.
I've heard of none of these. I need a
Jewish historian named Alan Segal. He wrote a book called The Two Powers in Heaven. And what he talks about is there's this weird thing happening in the Hebrew Bible where there's almost like two Yahweh figures that they point to. So some verses, for instance, will say like Yahweh rained down fire from Yahweh. And so Philo of Alexandria in the Second Temple period talks about this two powers in heaven motif. And he says like there's two Yahwehs. There's the first power and the second power, but they're both Yahweh. It's almost like a sort of proto-Trinitarian view. That's one thing that I'll just kind of put there for now. Another puzzle piece here is you've heard about the cloud rider motif. So in the Ugaritic texts, in the Baal cycle, we see Baal referenced as the one who rides the clouds. And I think you can see that actually adopted by the Israelites in the Hebrew Bible as well. So Psalm 104 is like an exaltation psalm and actually talks about Yahweh being the one that rides the clouds in heaven. He is the king. I see that as kind of a polemic of calling Yahweh the king over Baal. Are we on the same page there? Sure. Okay. Into Daniel 7, you'll see a messianic passage there about how God will come down, and you'll see the Son of Man come, riding in the clouds of heaven, and his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom.
Do you think Daniel thought that the Son of Man was going to be God, since he says that he's riding on a cloud?
This is a really interesting point.
I don't think that he did, because he was a Jewish writer.
I lean on saying yes, but I don't know if I can say that with like absolute certainty.
The prophet Daniel was expecting the Messiah to be God?
I think so.
Oh, sorry, the Son of Man to be God.
Who is, that's a motif only applied to God. So you have this cloud rider motif.
So by the way, I do think that there are multiple things which people, even in Jesus' time, thought only God could do. Things like forgiving sins. And when Jesus does these things, he's not doing so in order to prove that he's God, but in order to prove that the Son of Man has the authority to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. This isn't that kind of an argument. This is an identification thing.
So where's Jesus claiming to be God?
Yes, that's where I'm going. So we have these puzzle pieces in place. Sure. If you fast forward to Mark's gospel, and I'm going to use Mark.
Let's do Mark.
Jesus before Caiaphas in Mark's gospel, Caiaphas asks him, who are you? And instead of just explicitly saying, I am God, Jesus quotes Daniel 7, saying he is the Son of Man, the human one, who will ride on the clouds, and calls himself the second power. So you have this two powers in heaven motif, the two powers that both.
That's a really good point to watching this. It's all the low-hanging fruit people get. I enjoy it. What do you mean?
He's quoting Daniel 7 to identify
when they have
himself.
to face
After
Andrew
that,
Wilson.
Caiaphas tears his robe and cries blasphemy.
I do think that Jesus is making some pretty extraordinary claims to himself, such as being the Son of Man, but I still don't see why he's claiming to be God. If this were the way that he was trying to reveal his divinity to people, it'd be a strange and convoluted way to do it. Psalm 82 also talks about God presiding over a council of gods, saying, you shall be called gods.
I think there's a mistake here.
And Jesus quotes that psalm when he's referring to his relationship with the Father
I understand what you're
in the
saying.
Gospel of John. So even if in the Old Testament you have these sort of lesser gods,
right?
Jesus is only claiming to be that.
Right? That this is not a Christological implication, and I have mine. And I get what you're saying, where you're coming from. But to the ancient author, how obvious would this be?
So the best we have here is Jesus claiming to be the Son of Man, and that might indicate that he might be God.
Yeah, but we don't predicate our hypotheses on the evidence we wish we did have. We go off the evidence that we do have.
That's right. And I don't think that there's any point at which Jesus says,
so you're saying that
God.
this is not
All
evidence.
right, guys, that's time.
Evidence, but not good enough.
I don't discriminate based on religion.
Also very knowledgeable, very enthusiastic, and philosophically minded as well. Let me bring you back.
So, my claim, which might bother some people in this circle, and this is why I thought maybe we could find a little bit of middle ground here. Because I represent a form of Christianity that a lot of people don't even consider as Christian. I'm a Latter-day Saint. I'm a Mormon.
Awesome.
And my claim is that the restored gospel, also known as Mormonism, provides a conception of God that is more rationally defensible than any other creedal Christian sect.
Okay.
Rationally defensible. I mean, like listen, my priors against Mormonism are pretty high. I don't know if I would. Joseph Smith. Oh boy. Okay, let's see it, buddy.
Tell me why. I must admit, I don't know very much about Mormon theology. I know you also don't like being called Mormons, right? So I don't quite know what term to use.
We generally are not.
Latter-day Saints.
Latter-day Saints, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ. Yes. Our theological claims, for example, the problem of evil. Okay, so the way that we address it. So the problem really, so far as I can tell, that you have isn't so much with suffering, right? Because suffering could be something that is justified.
It might offer a better explanation of this. I don't know much about Mormonism, but also doesn't it require like 2 or 3 more like miracle claims than Christianity requires? Don't you have to believe in the golden plates and all that shit? That seems like a miracle claim that's potentially even more absurd than the resurrection.
Right, in principle, it's sort of the amount of suffering, the depth of suffering.
Absolutely. So the issue really is injustice. It's
not injustice. It's suffering, particularly suffering of non-human animals.
Okay, and fair enough. So with the concept of injustice, the Latter-day Saint conception of God is that God actually, his purpose is to make us become as he is.
Yes, does that include animals as well?
Animals are part of the created order that will be redeemed along with the rest of the created order.
Okay, so what does suffering do for them?
Suffering is part of the inherent nature of the world as a fallen world, okay?
Even for animals?
Yes, even for animals.
Whose fault is that?
Let me break it down.
I'm a lot of questions.
Yeah, let me break it down like this. Sure. So if I have a child, and I want my child to grow up to become like me, my child needs to go out of my house. He needs to go into the lone and dreary world. And if that is the case, that means that there's going to be some level of separation between me and him. He's in the world of injustice. It's a world that is unfair.
Why is that world unjust and unfair? Because I understand what you're saying. In this analogy, you want your child to become like you. And what that's going to involve is encountering suffering, developing as a person, getting thicker skin. The only reason that you want that for your child is because they're going to live in a world where
what are you asking for?
better dealing.
when did this shit start?
That, right? If you were given the opportunity to give your child a life that was separate from you, where they went about and did their business, but there wasn't that kind of suffering, and you chose the one in which there was suffering just for the sake of it, I think that would be problematic.
Well, it's not that I chose to put them in that world. See, this is a difference in Latter-day Saint theology.
Sure, that's what I'm interested in.
In Latter-day Saint theology, there is a pre-existence, and human beings knowing the...
No, you and me, I was saying Brian or Tyler Cohen has confirmation bias. Not Ryan Macbeth.
Unjust nature of reality have the choice.
Oh, they choose to.
They choose to enter into the mortal state, to pass through. The way to look at it is there's this realm of injustice where anything can happen. I can go out tomorrow, my kid can get cancer, all these things can happen. And the idea is we say, but if you're willing to pass through the realm of injustice, this is a necessary condition to reach your divine potential.
How come? Why is it necessary?
There's another thing about Latter-day Saint theology that's different.
Like,
for instance, God cannot create a square circle.
Why does that apply here? I mean,
because God cannot bring you to your divine potential because of the nature of the laws of reality.
Okay, but why not? Because you're just sort of restating that he can't do it. I want to know why.
I know what I'm saying is that there are laws that even God is bound by.
Like, which laws are relevant here? Like, which laws is
like the law of non-contradiction, for
instance. Why is explain to me how the law of non-contradiction binds God to not create a world where there's no suffering?
Because that relationship with God must be freely chosen, and God cannot force me. Because there is the question: why doesn't God just make us all happy?
But that's a separate question, because God could make a world in which there's no suffering, in which you're still
I disagree.
In which you're still free to choose whether or not to follow Him.
I would say that is a logical contradiction.
Okay, so maybe you can tell me why. Because right now what you're telling me is that it's illogical on the level of creating a square circle to create a system that a person can voluntarily choose to sort of exit the heavenly realm and go into in order to do whatever they need to do to get to God's ultimate
not to
potential.
get to God, to become as He is.
Sure, to fulfill their full potential that has to involve not just suffering, but the kind of suffering that we see on planet Earth. I'm asking why that's logically necessary.
A totally unjust world, okay? Because it is by passing through this realm that we have the experience of injustice that allows us to know what injustice is.
But why do we need to know what injustice is?
Because how else can you come to be like God? Kind of like the Adam and Eve story. There's the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil.
So what is justice? How do you define justice?
Off the top of my head, I would say that justice is getting what you deserve.
Yeah, right, okay. And so the problem is that, like, you can imagine a situation in which there was nothing wrong, nothing bad, nothing evil, and therefore no need for this rectifying force of justice. It's a little, we say justice is a good thing, but justice is a good thing insofar. Justice is a good thing insofar as it overcomes injustice. That's what it's there for. In the same way that chemotherapy is a good thing because it tries to overcome cancer. If I said that I was going to create cancer so that we could have the good of chemotherapy, and you said, why would you do that? And I said, because there's no way for us to achieve the good of chemotherapy without creating cancer. You look at me like I'd lost my mind.
No, it's like saying, this is the better analogy. It's like saying to my son, the only way that you can become the way I am is to go out into that world where anything could happen. And to persevere.
Okay, so I still have one, but for the sake of time, I want to ask you about animals. Do animals?
I mean, oh damn! I think like the thing he usually says like there's like, well, if you could create a world where your son could be like you, but didn't have to do that, would you not do that? I think that's usually like
consent to go into this.
The animal kingdom is part of the fallen world. They are part of the fallen order.
Do they feel pain?
I don't know. That's more of a good question. I don't know necessarily.
Okay. Dog, come on, bro, really, bro.
So, like, if I started strangling a dog in front of you, would you stop me?
Yeah, I think that I have an obligation to prevent the death of living creatures.
Not death. No, I'm not going to kill it. I'm going to
even
Deadpool style keep it alive just so it can suffer more.
Yeah,
Will
sure.
you stop me from doing that?
Yeah.
Right, why?
Because I believe that God wants us to protect the created order.
Okay, so
and to create goodness, light, and truth.
So would that be similar to, like, me stepping on a plant or something? You're just like, hey, don't do that.
I was going to say.
I think it's because they're suffering.
Yeah, I think it is probably because they're suffering, but I don't understand that suffering in terms of the way that humans suffer.
Okay, because you said that the reason why it's not so much of a problem for humans to enter the Vale of Tears and have to suffer is because they consent to do so before they're born. If animals don't do that, then I don't think that their suffering is justified on the same grounds.
Well, let me turn this around, because while I think that you bring up some objections there, my claim is that we have a better capacity to handle this than the creedal Christian model.
Sure. Okay.
So would you agree with my claim that we have a better model than creedal Christianity?
I don't know, because I don't know enough, because we've only been speaking for 10 minutes. There are probably things that it deals with better and things that it deals with worse. For example, I've spoken a ton on my show about the Gnostic cosmology, which I think does a lot to do away with problems like the problem of evil and the weird sort of seeming immateriality of Jesus in some passages and stuff. But there's a lot of problems with it too. There's a ton of problems, such as like God's providence and the nature of why the demiurge is created. All of these ideas are oftentimes, I think, created because they better account for certain things over others. Don't think that's necessarily the case with Mormonism, of course. But yeah, I'm sure in some cases it does better, in some cases it does worse. In this case, I don't think there's anything more to explain the suffering of animals.
Your problem with the suffering of animals is that it's unjust.
No, it's not.
Then suffering? If suffering
unnecessary.
Let's say the animals on the other side, for all they suffer, they get the best possible animal future that you could ever imagine. And the animals get there and they go, "This is great." It was.
And well, I mean, this just seems like. I don't think most Christians, I don't know, I guess maybe Mormons hold this. If you believe, I guess, what animals have souls and will experience the great animal heaven in the future or whatever, then like maybe you can make the case for it. But my understanding, most Christians don't even hold that.
All worth it.
Yeah,
then it would be worth it. So it's the injustice of it.
The question is, why aren't they just given that without the suffering first? I can understand why that wouldn't happen with humans, but whatever. Again, I want to clarify, I still have qualms with the idea.
I mean, that's true as well. Like, clearly animals aren't going to grow in the same way that humans are. Like, you're never going to overcome your suffering.
the natural order at the end. But why the animals? Why cause them to suffer?
Human beings will suffer as well, unjustly. It's just the nature of an unjust world.
The suffering of animals, I think, is unexpected if a good God is overseeing.
But it's not a problem if ultimately they are compensated.
Well, I think it still is a problem because you don't just get to inflict suffering and then compensate people and think that that's okay. Have you heard of the Burlington Club? It's a club.
No, if I have to inflict suffering on here,
wait a second. Let me give you this example. This example. There's an infamous club, a private members club at Oxford University called the Burlington Club. They're a bunch of like Eastonites, posh kids who used to go around. They go to restaurants. They were incredibly rich. They would host a dinner and then they would trash the place. They'd flip over tables. They'd smash things. They'd cover the walls and everything. It was absolutely devastating. It was horrible behavior. And then when the owner came up and said, "What the hell have you done?" They just paid them off. They said, "Hey, have a bunch of money." And not only that, they paid them way more than the repairs are worth. So they could get away with it because if anything, they've done those people a favor. No, it's still terrible, awful behavior because even if you've compensated someone for it, if you've caused them suffering, which by the way, still hasn't been explained why that suffering
Do you
exists.
remember 2000? No, I was born in 2005. So.
For instance, a dog that's getting a shot has no idea what's going on. He's just thinking, this hurts and is so terrible. And the thing is if it ultimately saves its life, it's worth it. So if there is a compensatory reward for the suffering that's there, everything can be redeemed. And in your view, is life even worth it? Because if life is mostly suffering even for the animals, then isn't the logical conclusion to end this project altogether?
That's a separate question. But if you had the opportunity to not have that dog need the shot, and you gave them the shot anyway, you created the need for the shot, and then gave them the shot, caused them to suffer.
But in LDS cosmology, God doesn't create the conditions that are where the shot is necessary. You're correct, and you're correct on creedal Christianity. It does, and that's the biggest flaw with it. By the way, I want to give you. Hey, Alex, it's been great to meet you.
Likewise. Yeah, see you later.
Give him his phone number or something.
That a lot of the people here might not even consider him to be a Christian because he's a Latter-day Saint. And I think the best thing that speaking to somebody like him does is reminding you that not all Christians are the same. There's not some uniform Christian worldview. Everybody who comes up is going to have a different opinion. And having a Latter-day Saint in there who has a totally different theology to other Christian denominations, let's say, I think is a good reminder.
I'm going to set up the YouTube stream again while this is going.
Overall, it was a really great experience. If I were to give my totally honest opinion, I think it was that Alex O'Connor was able to kind of destroy a lot of creedal Christianity because of the weaknesses in the creedal Christian position. And the Latter-day Saint, I couldn't help but feel like I think we have things that can help solve a lot of the problems that Alex has with creedal Christianity.
I think I probably disagreed with most people around this circle, my Christian contemporaries included, but I try to come in pretty curious, and so I actually feel like I'm leaving more informed and smarter on the other side of this.
I'm sad to say I felt like we found no middle ground, only due to the fact we were talking about a lot of the lore of the Bible. However, if we were able to kind of tackle on real modern day challenges, I feel like we could have found some middle ground.
People don't ask questions enough. I have a lot of respect for Alex because other atheists that I've talked to, usually they carry a lot of resentment and bitterness, but something about him is he can sit and have a mature, respectful conversation, ask questions, and also something that I would highly respect is that he knows the Bible maybe more than some Christians.
I'm only an atheist because of resentment and bitterness.
I'm glad that I did this.
Because God won't make my YouTube channel take off.
At the very least, the topics that were brought up in the short time we had work as a incredibly effective springboard for people to think about this kind of stuff. This will hopefully be the beginning of a fountain of useful information and content on those topics.
If you want to chat with me live, sub here or go to Nonfon420 on Twitch or Kick via the links below. Once again, please like and sub to help with the algorithm, and consider sending a donation through YouTube Super Thanks to directly support me, and I'll make sure to reply to any question you ask. See you guys next time.